Lover of the Dead by Frederick Cowles. I remember how I cursed and swore that night when the car broke down on the St. Brizzock road at a spot which I roughly calculated must have been at least 10 miles from the nearest village. And what a night it was. The wind was blowing great guns, and clouds of sleet swept in from the sea. The thunder of great waves seemed to make the tall cliffs tremble beneath their impact, and 1,000 furies shrieked and howled over the bleak moors. There was I, stranded in the most remote part of Cornwall, with insufficient mechanical knowledge to even locate the trouble. In any case, it would have been quite impossible to carry out a repair job in that hurricane. I made up my mind to endeavour to make myself comfortable in the back seat of the car until morning. But just as I was settling, a gull hurtled through the air and crashed into the side window. The glass was shattered to pieces, and the driving sleet soaked the cushions within 5 minutes. There was nothing for it but to seek shelter, and, so far as I knew, there was no house for miles. My mackintosh afforded little protection, but I started out along that desolate road, hoping against hope that some friendly light might gleam out through the night. Even a shepherd's hut would have been welcome, for I was thoroughly weary and chilled to the bone. My sense of direction isn't good at the best of times, and by some means or other I wandered from the main road and found myself on a track which appeared to lead away to the moorlands. My flashlight showed that the lane was bordered by yew hedges, and I argued that this fact was an indication of some human habitation. I must have stumbled on for about a mile when a building loomed up out of the darkness. It looked to be a fairly large house. No light shone in any window, and the place seemed deserted. Climbing the steps to the front door, I swung the heavy knocker. The sound reverberated hollowly, but no one answered my summons. Again I beat a frantic tattoo with the knocker. Some moments passed, and then I thought I heard someone moving on the other side of the door. Once more I knocked and flashed my light over the panels. Then, without a sound, the door swung on its hinges, and a queer-looking man stood in the gleam of the torch. I say he was queer-looking, but I find it difficult to describe him. His face was very white, his eyes were small and weak, and he was dressed in an ancient frock coat, green with age. We stood there regarding each other, although he could have seen little of me, for there was no light in the hall. Then, remembering my manners, I spoke. "Excuse me, sir," I said, "but my car has broken down, and I shall be most grateful if you will grant me shelter for a few hours." "Shelter," he repeated, and his voice was harsh and unfriendly. "Shelter? Is that all you want?" "What else should I require?" I answered sharply. "Of course I could do with a meal. I should even like a hot drink, but I have no desire to strain the limits of your hospitality, and shall be quite satisfied if you will allow me to sit in a chair until morning." "Come inside," he invited, "and please forgive my seeming discourtesy, but it is such a long time since I entertained company." "Oh, don't put yourself out at all," I begged as I entered the house. "Believe me, I am very sorry indeed to be forced to inconvenience you in any way." His skinny hand gripped my arm and piloted me into a large room to the right of the entrance. He made no attempt to produce a light, and I shivered when I found the place to be in darkness, with no fire burning in the grate. "Perhaps you have some candles in the house?" I suggested. "We can hardly sit here in the dark." "Why not?" he replied. "I live in darkness all my days. My soul knows nothing but eternal darkness, and I am doomed to be a lover of the dead." His voice held a note of hopeless despair which frightened me, and I knew that the fellow was undoubtedly mad. There was something eerie about the house, and something uncanny about this strange man who lived in darkness. "Sit down," he went on. "Make yourself as comfortable as is possible under the circumstances, and excuse the darkness. Shelter is all you asked, and shelter is all I can give." "You live a long way from a village, I suppose, sir?" I inquired. "I live a long way from any human beings," he replied in his dull, toneless voice. "But my wife and I are quite used to loneliness, and our requirements are few." "Then your wife lives here with you?" "Where else should she live?" he answered sharply. "Of course she is here. You must meet her. She is the loveliest woman in Cornwall, perhaps the most beautiful in the whole of England. I do not know, but don't fall in love with her. A man did that many years ago, and I killed him. Do you hear that? I killed him!" His voice rose to a shriek, and I began to be really frightened. What if this lunatic attempted to kill me? He appeared to be old and frail, but I knew that insanity often gives a man superhuman strength. Just then I heard a sound at the door, as if someone was fumbling at the handle. "Ah," said my host quietly. "She is here now. You will not see her, because we live in darkness. It is better that way, for her loveliness will not tempt you." I heard him rise, cross to the door, and fling it open. "Come in, my dear," he cried. "We have a guest, the first for many years." There was the rustle of a dress, and somebody else entered the room. I automatically jumped to my feet, and immediately became conscious of a nauseating smell. It was the damp, musty odour of decay. "Sit down, sir," came the man's voice out of the darkness. "Do not stand upon ceremony with us. We are very simple people." "Very simple people," came a soft echo in a woman's voice, and still no attempt was made to light a lamp or a candle, and in that impenetrable darkness I felt my scalp tingle. I heard the man and the woman seat themselves on the opposite side of the room, and in a sickening wave, the foul stench of corruption reached me again. I felt that I must scream out in terror, but with a mighty effort I managed to keep my nerves under control. Another sound at last broke the uncanny silence that had fallen upon us. It came from where I judged the window must be, and was nothing more than a long sigh. The effect of it upon my host was startling. He sprang to his feet, crying, "So you are here again? Must you always break in? I tell you she is mine, all mine, in death as she was in life. See, I kiss her lips, my arms embrace her. I am her lover, always. I heard him return to his seat, and then followed the sound of kisses in the gloom. Those caresses seemed more horrible, more terrifying than anything that had gone before. It was more than I could stand. Springing to my feet, I shouted, "What hellish business is going on here?" Pressing the switch of my torch, I flashed the beam across the room, and then I gasped in horrified amazement. The man who had admitted me to the house was sitting on a settee. His eyes gleamed with mad mirth, and in his arms he held the decomposed body of a woman. Strands of dark hair hung about the green, mouldering face, and fleshless hands sagged across the faded, stained dress. "Is she not lovely?" the madman cried. I told you her beauty would dazzle your eyes." For a moment or so I gazed at the ghastly scene, and then another sigh from the window made me turn my light in that direction. The man stood there in the shadows. If the thing I saw could be called a man, really it was just an animated corpse with a white skull, grinning in horrible mockery. Whimpering with terror, I made for the door. How I got outside that house of horror, I do not know. But by some means I found myself running down the drive, with the wind buffeting me and the sleet lashing my face. I seemed to have been running for hours when I saw a light gleaming through the night and stumbled up to a cottage door and sank exhausted on the step. And then I remember nothing more until I awakened to find myself in a warm bed, the morning sun streaming through the casement, and a kind-faced elderly man sitting near me. "Ah," he exclaimed as I opened my eyes, "you have had a very nice sleep. How do you feel this morning?" I admitted that I felt rather weak and that my limbs ached. "That's not to be wondered at," he replied. "You were soaked to the skin when you arrived here last night, but we'll soon have you right. Some nice hot soup will make a new man of you." He raised his voice and called, "Mary, bring some of that soup along." In less time than it takes to write it, a motherly-looking woman entered the room, bearing a tray on which was a steaming bowl and some thin pieces of toast. "I'm right glad to see you looking so fresh after such a night in the storm," she said with a smile. "Now, see if you can swallow this." I needed no second bidding, and the warm, nourishing broth quickly made me feel more like myself. As soon as I had finished the meal, I began to explain how it was that I had made such a sudden appearance out of the night. I told them of the abandoned car, of my discovery of the yew-hedged land, and of the house of horror in which I had sheltered. As I mentioned the house, I noticed them exchange glances. When I had completed my recital, the old man coughed gently and looked across at his wife again. "Better tell the lad the truth, John," she said, as if in answer to an unspoken question. "I suppose so," he replied. "It's not a nice story, but he ought to know." "Yes," I exclaimed. "Please tell me. Who was the madman I saw?" "Well, it's queer, I know, but you seem to have met the ghost of Dr. Goodridge. 10 years ago he came to live at Marlow Grange. He was a morose, unfriendly individual, and was reputed to be a famous alienist. The whole countryside was surprised when, after a long absence from home, the doctor returned with a very attractive girl, whom he announced was his wife. I saw her once or twice, and it appeared to me that she lived in mortal terror of her husband. She must have found it dull down here, for she was very young, too young to be buried so far away from bright lights and gay company. Some months after her arrival, a young man came to stay at the Grange. He was Mrs. Goodrich's cousin, and the two used to go about a lot together. I've seen them bathing in Portland Cove, tramping over the moors, and picnicking on the beach. I suppose it was inevitable that two young people, so dependent upon each other, should fall in love. One day, I saw the doctor hiding behind a bush and peering over a cliff. He did not notice me, and I glanced over to see what was interesting him so much. On the rocks far below were his wife and her cousin, and to say the least of it, they were in a compromising attitude. It seems that the doctor must have been half mad himself. I suppose continuous contact with lunatics often affects the mentality of doctors and nurses. He planned to kill the unsuspecting pair, and did so quite easily by introducing poison into their food. Before he committed the crime, he dismissed all the servants, giving out that he and his wife were going abroad. Well, the tragedy wasn't discovered until over a month later. A cattle drover, passing the Grange one night, heard screams of mad laughter coming from the house. He reported the matter to the police at St. Brizek, and they forced an entrance. They found Dr. Goodrich, absolutely insane, sitting on a settee in the drawing room, and fondling the decomposed body of his wife. In the window recess was the corpse of her lover, as grisly a sight as could be imagined. "What happened to the doctor?" I asked. "Well, he was too mad to answer any charge against him. He was confined in the criminal lunatic asylum at Port Minver, and died there about 18 months ago." Then it was his ghost I saw," I stammered. "Yes," answered the old man slowly. "You must have seen his ghost, and the ghost of the house, for Marlow Grange was demolished over 7 years ago, and not a stone of it is left today." The Witch Finder by Frederick Cowles. The wind howled mournfully, and the cold rain lashed the solitary rider, whose weary horse stumbled along the muddy road. The night was dark, and the man could hardly see a yard before him, but with an impatient word he urged his tired nag onwards. At a shadowed corner, something clanked dolefully, and the horse reared as a shapeless mass swung out over the road. The rider drew rein with a startled exclamation, and then chuckled as he realized he had reached Caxton Gibbet. He lifted his hat in mocking salutation, and in a thin, reedy voice cried out, "Is it thou, old Mother Lane? How doth it feel to be so high up in the world? And is it thou, Master Hugh Murray, witch finder of East Anglia, justice of the peace, and murderer of women?" A hoarse voice answered him. Master Hugh almost tumbled from his horse in fright. His hair literally stood on end, and he trembled as though he had ague. With an effort he made to dig spurs into his mount, but before he could do so, a figure leapt from beneath the gibbet and seized the mare's bridle. "God's soul!" screamed the witch-finder. "Who art thou?" "Anthony Lane," the low voice replied, "son of the poor creature who hangs on yonder tree, and grandson of that Margaret Bell whom thou didst burn a year ago." "Unhand me, fool," ordered the man, recovering himself. "Lose the bridle, or it will fare hardly with thee." "When I have delivered my message, Master Hugh, I give thee greetings from the dead, and the promise that all the torments they experienced thou also shalt know." With a muttered curse, Hugh Murray raised his whip to strike the youth who dared threaten him. The fellow dropped the bridle and vanished into the night. His laughter, weird and mocking, died away in the distance as the infuriated justice drove spurs into his horse's flanks and galloped on. Soon he came to a crossroad and paused to decide which path to take. It was still some miles to Cambridge, and in such a storm he had small hope of arriving there before the early hours of the morning. There was the direct way through Grantchester, which would mean a ride through the Cambridge Main Street to get to his inn near Magdalen Bridge. The other road, crossing Madingley Hill, necessitated a slight detour, but would bring him into the town almost at the door of the hostelry where he intended to lodge. On the whole, it would be better to take the Madingley road. He was not popular in Cambridge, and had no desire to risk an encounter with the townspeople or scholars who might recognise him. Mr. Hugh Murray turned his horse's head to the left and rode on through the night. He recalled with a shudder how a Cambridge mob had once pelted him with garbage and broken his head, and all because he had gone there hunting witches in the name of His Majesty James of England. It was not as if he were an ordinary witch-finder, like the fellow Hopkins. He, Hugh Murray, was a man of property, a justice of the peace, and in high favour at the court. Witch-hunting was his hobby, and he was determined to use every means to exterminate the foul brood of witches and warlocks from the counties of East Anglia. The road was bleak, with no village for miles, although he did see the lights of Childerley in the distance as he joined the main highway. The storm increased in fury. Master Hugh was already soaked to the skin, and his horse was in a sorry plight. The gentle slope of Madingley Hill was before him, but the nag could hardly stumble onwards. The witch-finder looked for some place where he could shelter until the storm abated. Thick woods lined the road, but the trees afforded no protection. With a groan he dismounted and resigned himself to climbing the hill on foot. It was then he saw a cottage amongst the trees. A narrow path led up to it, but the window showed no light, and the house appeared to be deserted. He knocked on the door with his riding crop, but a hollow echo was the only reply. He knocked louder, and this time thought he heard the sound of someone moving within. After an interval of some seconds, the door opened slowly, and a white face peered out at him. It was the countenance of an old woman, lined and wrinkled, and vaguely familiar. Before he could utter a word, the hag addressed him in a cracked, wheedling voice. "Come inside, Master Hugh Murray. Come inside, my bonny witch-finder. Here is shelter for thee." Without pausing to inquire how the woman knew his name, the man tied his horse to the branch of a tree and entered the cottage. Peat fire was burning on the hearth, but no lamp or candle illuminated the hovel. "All we can offer, Your Honour, is a bed," the cracked voice whispered. "Just a bed to stretch your limbs upon. To stretch your limbs. A cold hand grasped his arm and led him across the room towards a low couch which was dimly visible in the firelight. He removed his saturated coat and flung himself down upon the bed. It was very hard, just a wide board with no mattress. But the witchfinder was tired, and even such a primitive resting place was welcome. He stretched his limbs and closed his eyes. The sound of soft laughter disturbed him. He endeavoured to raise his head, and so became aware of the fact that, in some mysterious manner, he had become fastened to the bed. His feet and hands were secured by ropes, and his body spread-eagled in a most uncomfortable way. And then he realised that it was no bed he was stretched upon, but the rack of torture. Master Hugh licked his dry lips and voiced a protest. "What is the meaning of this foolery?" he cried. "Not foolery, my brave witchfinder," answered the woman who had admitted him to the cottage. "Surely it is not foolery when Master Hugh Murray hath himself shown us how usefully this instrument may be employed." The hag laughed, and another joined in the mirth. There were two of them bending over him. He saw their white faces, their cruel eyes, their grey elfin locks. "Who art thou?" he cried, "and what damnable mummery is this?" "Softly, softly, Master Hugh," came the reply. "Little did you think to meet us again. I am that Alice Lane whose broken body yet hangs upon Caxton gibbet. With me is my mother, Margaret Bell, whom thou didst condemn to the fire a year ago this very day." A cold sweat bathed the witchfinder's body. His lips essayed to mutter a prayer. "I pray, but it will avail thee not," went on the lifeless voice. "The tortures we knew, thou also shalt experience. Death shall come slowly, even as it came to us." "He pricked me all over to find the witch mark," said the other voice. The man felt cold hands unloose his clothes and expose his body. Then a pin was driven into his chest and another into his leg. He screamed and twisted in agony, but his torturers only withdrew the pins and inserted them in other places. "Are the pincers hot?" the first voice inquired. "He drew my teeth with red-hot pincers, drew them one by one until the flesh was burnt from my gums and my tongue but a charred stump." "Mercy, mercy," cried the victim. "Have mercy, I implore you." "Hast thou ever shown mercy?" asked the tired old voice. He saw the glow of hot pincers and felt his mouth forced open. Then came the scorching pain as they touched his gums. The red-hot instrument tore at his teeth and dragged them from his jaws. His mouth was a well of fire, searing his throat and stinging his eyes. Warm blood spurted over his chest, and he was conscious of the reek of burning flesh. Another tooth was drawn, and then he fainted. Cold water splashing on his face revived him, and he tried to articulate another plea for mercy. but his tongue was burnt to the roots and was incapable of functioning. He strained weakly at his bonds and writhed on the wooden frame. "Daughter," croaked the elder woman, "he put needles under the nails of my fingers and toes. Hot needles. He also shall know the agony of the needles," was the reply. Master Hugh felt cold hands grip his fingers, and then the excruciating pain of a glowing needle being driven under a nail. He sobbed and twisted his body. Then another needle was forced beneath one of his toenails. He prayed for death to release him from this torment. "Mother, he had my nails torn from my fingers." "Tear his nails, daughter. Here are the pincers. Break and tear his hands even as he tore thine." The tortured wretch, almost unconscious with pain, felt the instrument grip a nail, and then it seemed that the whole top of a finger was torn away. He tried to scream, but no sound issued from his bleeding mouth. The elder woman was speaking again. "When I reproached him with my eyes, he ordered hot coals to be laid upon them." Dimly, he was aware of smouldering embers burning into his head, into his brain. Surely this must be the end. He could endure no more. And then, with a creaking and groaning, the rollers of the rack began to turn. His body was stretched until the joints were dislocated. With a gasp of agony, Hugh Murray died, and the last sound he heard was the hellish laughter of the women he had tortured and killed. A farmer, driving into Cambridge in the early hours of the morning, noticed the horse tethered to a tree near the cottage. Being an inquisitive fellow, he entered the building and discovered the witch-finder's body lying on the bed. Master Murray's face was twisted into a horrible grimace, but he seemed to have died a natural death, for there were no signs of violence on the body. Only the people of Madingley noted the curious fact that Hugh Murray had died in the cottage, formerly inhabited by two of the notorious witches he had condemned to death, Margaret Bell and her daughter, Alice Lane. Today's stories were The Lover of the Dead and The Witch Finder by Frederick Cowles. They were read by Jasper L'Estrange. Well, I do hope you enjoyed them, and until next time, sweet dreams.